War. War never changes. On today's podcast, I'll be sharing with you my thoughts on why aggressive warlike states may arise in chimpanzees, and what this might tell us about our own nature as humans. My main source of information for this podcast is from Chimpanzees, Warfare and the Invention of Peace by Dr. Michael Lawrence Wilson of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. This paper forms a chapter in the 2013 book, War, Peace and Human Nature. If you find this subject particularly interesting like I do, then please read the original source. So what is war? Well, I would classify war as an active, violent conflict extended over time that is between two or more groups. Is war just a human invention, or perhaps does it have a deeper evolutionary root? Well, Dr. Wilson explains how our current understanding arises from the intellectual traditions established by the philosophers Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who mainly based their thinking on their individual intuition and the narratives which they had heard from others throughout their lives. Now, I'm not a philosopher, so please excuse me if I do not fully understand each position, but as I know it, Hobbes thought that war was the natural state of humans when not kept in check by Leviathan-sized institutions. In contrast, Rousseau thought that humans were naturally peaceful and cooperative until corrupted by institutions and concepts such as property rights. Now, personally, from my point of view, I find both Hobbes and Rousseau's positions kind of suspect. Now, maybe they were just men of their time, but the fact that one would think that humankind's natural state is complete war, and the other would think humans are naturally peaceful, just tells me that neither of these philosophers actually looked at the nature of humanity through an evolutionary lens, which is ridiculous if you're going to make statements on the nature of humankind. And even if you're going to make statements on the aspect of an individual human out in the wild, well, this wouldn't make sense either, because both of these philosophers would have met people with different propensities, different capabilities, different aptitudes, different personalities, and how can you walk away from that thinking, oh, all humankind is either in war or humankind are naturally peaceful? It just seems ridiculous. Every single person has a different propensity for a different amount of things. Some are more cooperative, some are more competitive. So the way that they got to these conclusions just boggles my mind. Now, why do I think these philosophers are wrong? Well, I don't actually think they're completely wrong. They may be right in a certain aspect. Take Rousseau's argument that humankind are naturally peaceful. Well, this may be true when you're talking about, say, in-groups or kin, but even then not completely true because there's still competition. And maybe this is where Hobbes is just a little bit more right in that natural humankind exists in a perpetual state of war. Because not only are you competing against nature, you're competing against other animals within nature, and that includes other humans. But even then, you're not actually always at war, because you're not always at war with your kin, you're not always at war with your allies. Sometimes you can't be at war with your allies because you have mutual things to gain. So why do I think both these philosophers are partially wrong, and instead human nature should be studied through a more evolutionary focused lens? Well, as Darwin said, natural selection involves competition, and competition is frequently lethal. Animals will fight members of their species over access to key resources, such as food, shelter, and mates. The rarity of these resources can impact the aggression shown by those who desire them, due to the benefits that obtaining them will have upon the individual and their fitness. Although aggressive behaviour is not always beneficial, it does carry a cost. Not only does it take time away that could be spent on other behaviours, perhaps more pleasurable behaviours like mating, it can also be physically costly to all involved. This is why many animals usually avoid getting into physical conflict when it is possible to avoid it, instead resorting to threatening displays to scare off their rivals. If an animal does get into a physical conflict, they usually chase their rival off, rather than pursuing and killing them, because this costs additional energy, and even an injured or trapped rival can lash out at its pursuer, potentially causing life-threatening injury. Although fatal fights do sometimes occur, however this is mostly when the value of the resource is particularly high. For example, Dr. Wilson explains that in some species of spider, the female population is sparse. This, coupled with a high predation rate and slow travel time between different populations, means that males may only expect to encounter one female in their lifetime. Therefore, if two males encounter the same female, fighting to death for access to the female may be the only opportunity that they will ever have to pass on their genes. Although animals may also kill when the cost of killing their opponent is low. For instance, infanticide in lions is a low-cost strategy for the adult male lion to pursue due to their overwhelming physical size and power in comparison to a lion cub. It also has the additional benefit of allowing the cub's mother to come back into estrus, therefore reducing the amount of resources that are spent on her previous sire's cubs and diverting any future resources to his own offspring. We understand that animals are adaptive. They don't follow a simple strategy of always behaving aggressively. Instead, animals will employ aggression selectively based off the information in their environment. For example, when considering physical conflict between groups, the more numerous group usually has an advantage in winning any conflict. Motivation also plays a role. Individuals may fight harder or more aggressively to defend resources which they already have access to, or if their life depends on the outcome. So overall, the reasons and sources of conflict are multifaceted. However, perhaps by studying our close relatives, the chimpanzee, we can gain some empirical evidence to help us understand the root causes of warfare and what it means for us as humans. So you might ask yourself, why study chimpanzees if we want to understand something about human behaviour and human nature? Well, chimpanzees are our closest living primate relative, and if we can study them and understand the similarities that they share with us, perhaps we can understand when this evolved during our evolutionary lineage, and then just how baked into human nature these behaviours and aspects possibly are. Though to understand if warfare takes place between chimpanzees, we will first need to understand certain aspects of chimpanzee nature. Wild chimpanzees live in groups called communities. These communities can number more than 150 individuals. However, most normally number around 40 individuals. Now, an interesting aspect is that males tend to spend their entire lives within their community of birth. Female chimpanzees tend to migrate to another community once they have reached sexual maturity. This is presumably to avoid inbreeding. Now, living in such a large community, you'd think, well, perhaps maybe these chimpanzees all live together like one big happy family. You may have seen the videos of baboon troops existing in large numbers travelling across the savannah all together, but chimpanzees aren't like this. Despite their large numbers, they actually exist in a social organisation which is called fission-fusion. In this social organisation, all members of a community rarely come together all at once. Instead, they exist in subgroups called parties, which tend to grow and shrink over the day as its members go about their business, be this travelling, foraging, or resting together. Now, a chimpanzee community can occupy a large home range, with annual ranges covering between 10 to 30 kilometers squared in forest-dominated environments and more than 50 kilometers squared in dry grassland or savanna-like habitats. On average, male chimpanzees tend to range more widely within their territory than females. This includes males visiting the peripheries of their ranges more for multiple reasons, including searching for food, mates, or to conduct boundary patrols. Chimpanzees go on patrol only once they have assembled enough members to reliably have overwhelming force if they encounter another chimpanzee belonging to a foreign community, due to the dangers and damages that even a single chimpanzee can do to another. These patrols represent an investment in defence of a community's territory, but this imposes time, energy and opportunity costs on the patrolling group. However, this is likely necessary to prevent encroachment, resource loss and female abduction by rival chimpanzee communities. Within a chimpanzee's range, they live at low densities, tending to stay towards the centre of their range. This means social encounters between members of neighbouring communities occur very rarely. Though obviously the more densely populated that an area is, the chance that an encounter between neighbours is more likely to occur. When members of different communities do make social contact, the vast majority of interaction is limited to vocalisations. Now, in my mind, this just reminds me of seeing, say, two opposing football teams singing chants at each other from across a stadium. Or if you've ever been on a night out, maybe you've seen a group of guys that have gotten into a bit of an altercation and they're having a shouting match from across the street. That's exactly what this reminds me of. But moving on. Now, it's less frequently that chimpanzees will actually come into visual range of each other. While the interactions which do involve physical contact represent only a small proportion of intergroup interaction, actually less than 2%. When they do occur, the outcome is often physical injury and sometimes even the death of one or more of those involved. Now, the sex of the encountering members greatly influences the likelihood of hostile behaviour. Males encountering other males are the most likely to result in physical aggression, while males encountering infantless, sexually receptive females are far less likely to result in any aggressive behaviour at all. Now, when a group of chimpanzees form a troop and set out to find chimpanzees of another specific community along their border and then attack and kill them, this can look awfully like warfare. Arguably the most well-known instance of warlike behaviour in chimpanzees was documented between 1974 and 1978 by the renowned British primatologist Jane Goodall. She recorded that over an 8-month period, the once unified community known as the Kasakela split into two separate communities, the Kasakela in the north and the new Kahama community in the south. The violent conflict that Goodall recorded became known as the Gombe Chimpanzee War. The Kasakela males proceeded to direct violence towards the Kahama. This violent behaviour was conducted over the 4-year period after their split and resulted in the Kasakela males killing all the Kahama males, while the Kahala females were either killed, went missing or were taken by the males of the Kasakela. When you consider the fact that most violent exchange occurs on the border of a community, I wonder if it was the fact that the Kahama community inhabited territory which had previously belonged to the Kasakela that instigated the warlike state of behaviour directed from the Kasakela towards the Kahama. Because if the males of the Kasakela did not recognise their new borders, and instead laid claim to the previous borders before the split of the two groups, this would make the Kahama trespassers within the borders that the Kasakela claim. And then it's no wonder that such aggressive killings took place, because the Kasakela would not want to lose the resources of the females to any trespassing group, despite the fact that group used to be a part of theirs. However, this is just speculation by myself, but anywho, back to the topic at hand. Since this war was recorded, chimpanzee behaviour has been studied at more than 50 sites all across Africa, while observations of intergroup killing have been documented in 67% of all studied chimpanzee communities. Chimpanzees are killed usually when they are caught alone, be it due to them foraging alone or being left behind by their party members fleeing from an attack. The chimpanzees that commit these killings tend to be excited male adults and adolescent males. While females do participate in attacks, they tend to participate indirectly through the use of vocalizations, though instances of females joining males in attacking other chimpanzees has been documented. Chimpanzee killings tend to be extremely gruesome, with victims being pinned to the ground while other chimpanzees inflict puncture wounds with their canine teeth, and they remove their victims' limbs and genitals through biting, pounding, twisting. Attackers even commit cannibalism when attacking females with infants, and they either partially or completely consume the infant victim. So all of this is rather harrowing. But how does the rate of intraspecies, intergroup aggression compare between chimpanzees and humankind? Well, in their 2006 research article, Wrangham and others compared the rates of intergroup violence between chimpanzees and various human societies. They found that the median amount of violent chimpanzee deaths was 271 per 100,000 individuals per year, of which 69 deaths per 100,000 individuals was from intergroup aggression. When comparing the chimpanzee data to that of 19th century and 20th century subsistence-level human societies, Wrangham and others found that hunter-gatherer based societies incurred a median of 164 deaths per 100,000 people per year from intergroup aggression, while farming-based societies incurred a median of 595 individuals killed per 100,000 people per year. An interesting comparison to make is between this data and that of one of the most violent American cities, Detroit, which during the 1970s and 80s had a homicide rate of 45 deaths per 100,000 individuals per year. From this data we can take that when you consider the population size, observation time and number of deaths directly related to intergroup aggression, we can ascertain that intra-specific killing is similar in magnitude between that of wild chimpanzees and subsistence-level human societies, while industrialised democracies, even in their most violent sense, are extremely less likely to result in intra-specific killing. However, it should be noted that to understand the rate of warfare between hunter-gatherer societies is difficult, due to sparse data. Although data taken from Australian hunter-gatherers indicate that between 10% to 30% of males are lost to intergroup aggression, while violence caused between an estimated 5% and 6.5% of all deaths. This is comparable to wild chimpanzee communities, where intergroup violence accounts for between 3.8% and 9.3% of all deaths. Now, if you compare this to the 1% of deaths caused by, say, warfare in the 20th century, we can see that wild chimpanzee communities and subsistence-level human societies lose far more members to intergroup violence than our current global societal circumstances. So all of this is rather interesting, in that different levels of societal organisation have different amounts of group conflict. But let's get deeper. Let's try to discover what are the underlying causes of warlike behaviour within primates. I think the best place to begin is with what we know about the ultimate causes. Dr. Wilson describes an ultimate cause as addressing the question, why do animals behave in such a way? Well, a simple answer to this is because behaviour must benefit the animal's inclusive fitness if they are to evolve and be adapted by means of natural selection. From this premise, our question on the ultimate cause can be translated into a general form, which asks, does a particular behaviour or behavioural strategy increase the actor's number of direct or indirect descendants, and if so, how? Well then, our first question to answer must be, why do male chimpanzees act aggressively to defend their group's territory? Aggressive behaviour between group living animals is a common phenomenon. Living in groups can provide the individual of said group with a competitive advantage in accessing rare resources such as high-valued food, good drinking water, decent shelter, and perhaps most importantly, mates of the opposite sex. Now, resources are limited, some extremely so. Therefore, if an individual loses access to these resources either through unrestricted altruism or by being driven off by another group, then this constitutes an unacceptable loss due to the long-term impact upon the fitness of the individual. So in order to avoid this unacceptable loss in fitness, resources will need to be defended. But what benefit does the individual gain from being part of a group that defends their valued resource? Possible benefits include excluding outside males from mating with resident females, therefore decreasing the chance of the excluded chimps from passing on their genes, while increasing the chance of group members passing on their genes through increased mating opportunities and preservation of offspring. A defended territory also has an additional number of benefits. It can hold valued resources which can be used to recruit new females once they emigrate from their original community after their adolescence. Therefore, defended resources can beget more resources, and the females benefit by avoiding inbreeding with their male kin. A defended territory can also allow access to more food, which will facilitate the development of healthy chimps, not only allowing the individuals the chance to live longer, but for their offspring to also. And this also results in females having shorter interbirth intervals, therefore being able to produce more offspring in a shorter time period. This can then facilitate the support of a larger group which can better defend their territory and resources and better compete against other groups of chimpanzees. So this all makes sense, but then why do chimpanzees kill their rivals rather than simply chase them away? Well, in most animals this takes place when the value of the resource being fought over is unusually high, when a large fraction of the opponent's reproductive success is at stake. However, if a chimpanzee decides not to kill an intruder, it's not likely to result in a large drop of lifetime reproductive success. So in that case, why ever kill an intruder? As we know, killing a rival incurs both costs and benefits, with the main cost of killing being the risk of injury to the attacker, along with the energy and time that is also expended. While the main benefit of killing a rival is that it eliminates a genetic competitor and reduces neighbouring group strength, thereby keeping their own group safer and increasing the chance that their genes will be passed on. Chimpanzees that participate in warlike behaviour could potentially benefit from being ruthless. Though male chimpanzees are always aggressively assault intruders regardless of the circumstances, would eventually find himself picking an unwinnable fight and being killed, thus reducing their fitness. Therefore, the cost of being so aggressive towards outsiders is usually too high for the individual, unless they are supported by other group members in the forms of a party. Therefore, it's not surprising that we have observed chimpanzees forming parties to patrol their borders, and these patrol groups being more ready to assault lone chimpanzees than another group as a whole. Okay, so the underlying ultimate cause of intergroup aggression makes sense in the light of inclusive fitness and natural selection. But things tend to be far more complicated than just why an animal expresses a certain behaviour. We also need to know the proximate causes for the expression of the behaviour. In addressing the proximate cause, we have to ask the question, how do internal and external factors such as physiology and the environment influence the response to their behaviour's ultimate cause? Well, one key factor affecting intergroup killing is the social situation, especially the numerical asymmetries between two groups. In a 2004 paper, a Dr. Gibbons described how chimpanzees went on patrol only after forming a party of significant enough size to reliably overcome their opponents. This doesn't mean that these chimps can count, simply that the number of chimpanzees in their surrounding environment encourages a feeling of perhaps safety in numbers. Although communities with more males are on average more likely to have an advantage over smaller communities when performing patrols or being found by a patrol. Chimpanzees are thought more likely to conduct boundary patrols when the numbers of a community are powerful enough to encroach upon neighbouring territory. An interesting observation is that while on patrol, males tend to keep very quiet. This is thought to not attract attention from rival groups, though it has been observed that in areas where contact between groups is less likely, male chimpanzees are known to make more noise. So while social factors can directly affect the occurrence of intergroup aggression, another important factor is ecological, specifically the presence and abundance of food. Chimpanzees require food to keep living, and therefore access to food is vital to allow for future mating opportunities and thus potentially increasing their fitness. This however means that food resources attract chimpanzees, and this draw doesn't stop due to a community's boundary, thereby providing an area in which intergroup interaction can occur in the presence of a vital resource. The abundance of food is also important when considering intergroup aggression. Local food availability can lead to differences in foraging party size, with food which is abundant in one area enabling larger parties to forage, while areas with scarce amounts of food disincentivize large group foraging activities, resulting in individuals foraging alone, which can leave individuals open to attack from rival patrols. In human societies, discussion of aggression and ecology often regard that intergroup aggression is modulated by resource scarcity. In contrast, chimpanzees seem to be the most aggressive towards other chimpanzee groups during periods of resource abundance. Now personally, I think with more research we will probably find that both food scarcity and abundance work in tandem to facilitate warfare-like behaviour. For example, food scarcity in one area means that a chimpanzee will be forced to move into another abundant area if they want to eat, and therefore it will be in these abundant areas that intergroup aggression takes place. However, this is just a speculation on my part. Let's wait and see if future observations verify this. Another important ecological factor to talk about is a factor that affects most species on our planet, that being human disturbance. In the past, chimpanzee observations and research stations provide food to the chimpanzees they're observing. This had a number of negative effects on the chimpanzees, resulting in increased aggressive competition within the community for high-valued food, more male-on-male aggression, thought to be associated with rank displays and the dominance hierarchy, a greater increase in competition for female mating opportunities, and more border patrols, resulting in increased amounts of intergroup aggression. This makes sense because not only does the provision of food free up foraging time, this time can now be spent on social behaviours, such as fighting off your male competitors to try to win the affections of a female. The community also has a new vulnerable source of food that it will actually have to defend from intruders. Therefore, it's not surprising that they increase the amount of boundary patrols to try to keep this new food source safe. On a research note, provision of food is also changing the behaviour of wild chimpanzees, which would decrease the validity of any of the scientists' observations, or any studies that are being carried out at such sites. Therefore, it's a good thing that this practice is now discouraged. Another thing that humans do that can affect chimpanzee communities is converting their natural habitat into farmland. Now, this may be good for the humans, but it's not so good for the chimpanzees, because this can increase competition between the groups and individuals due to limited space and limited resources. Human contact also means that chimpanzees are vulnerable to poaching and zoonotic diseases, each of which can decrease the strength of a community, increasing their vulnerability to attack from another chimpanzee group. So what can we take away from the causes and observations of warlike behaviour in chimpanzees? Well, male chimpanzees will actively compete over access to food for themselves, their kin, their allies, their female mates, and their offspring. Males who successfully defend resources can expand their territory to acquire new resources, and when this behaviour is directed from one group to another and viewed by humans, this can appear to be warlike in its nature. Yet this behaviour actually appears to be adaptive because participation in it leads to inclusive fitness benefits. Males who successfully defend resources appear more likely to father more offspring and have more successfully reproducing kin than males who fail to guard their resources. Therefore, in evolutionary terms, warlike behaviour will be selected for as the circumstances permit. But what does this say about humanity? Well, warlike behaviour in chimpanzees appears to rely on features mirrored in early human societies. Features such as male coalitions, fission-fusion social organisation, internal male competition over access to reproduction with females, and competition with hostile neighbours. In fact, many parallels exist between the warlike behaviour of chimpanzees and the process of warfare carried out by early human societies. In both chimpanzees and humans, males will actively group together to guard group resources that are essential to their reproductive success, and in the process of keeping these resources safe, they will seek out the competitors and either chase them off or eliminate them. They also sometimes seek to acquire more land and more resources when their neighbours are seen as weak, and in this they kill the male members of their rivals while capturing the females for mating purposes. Therefore, the special features of humanity, such as weapons, agriculture, sedentary populations, ideology, religion or states, are not needed for the evolution of war-like behaviour, as displayed by chimpanzees communities having an intergroup killing rate comparable to early human societies experiencing a state of war. If humans and their primate ancestors survived and reproduced for long enough under similar social and ecological conditions as to those experienced by current-day chimpanzees, then it is likely that over a long enough period of evolutionary time, the psychological mechanisms underlying warfare are likely to develop due to their fitness benefits. If this is true, then, as stated by Dr. Wilson, the state of peace between potential rivals is perhaps the most profound of all human inventions. It is therefore disappointing that so few scholars of war and peace have adapted a behavioural ecological framework to their reasoning. Well, I think that perhaps now it is time to develop this framework. By neglecting the effects of our evolutionary past on our ability to wage war, we may be bypassing a process which can effectively lead to a greater state of peace and prosperity for all. Well, we have come to the end of the podcast, so I'd just like to thank everyone for listening, and to all my non-human primate listeners, I'd just like to say, apes together, strong.